Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we recheck coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 265, and we're going to talk about greed. Greed revisited. Is it really evil, or is it personal protection? It's going to be probably a little bit shorter than my normal episode. I got to squeeze in a recording before I leave. One of my kids has a gig, a jazz gig, and we want to go see it because he's going to be performing one of his arrangements. But anyway, so greed. It's in the news, that healthcare CEO was killed because of greed. And people love going on about greed. And I love talking about greed when I was in college, when I was teaching in college. And that's because people get it so wrong. And people feel usually people who kind of just go along with things, they do so because out of guilt, right? Wow, greed is so bad. I even learned at church, greed is so bad. And so I can't be an advocate for greed. That would just be even worse. So, what is greed? I would always ask people, so let's get this out of the way. Most people would say greed is wanting more than you need. And immediately you know, because you're going to use the word need based on whose perception of need. Someone who's starving in Africa, their needs, or someone in North America who could easily get a job but chooses to go on welfare. What is need? And you begin to realize that need is subjective. It's arbitrary. Who gets to decide what that need is? Hopefully, that's enough for you to get on to realize just, depending on who you are, your needs will be different. And people try to cover up their needs by saying what they deserve to be paid, but they flip back and forth depending on what's convenient and who they're talking about. So, for example, back in the day, Diane Sawyer, I remember watching her and she was talking about greedy CEOs, but she was making $19 million a year. So, what does that mean? That means if you are making less than $19 million a year, there is no way that you can be greedy, right? Because it's clearly, if Diane Sawyer is not greedy, making $19 million a year, then anyone making less than her cannot, no matter what, be greedy. It's only people who make more than her, obviously. And so this is kind of the situation. So depending on who is calling another greed, then the standard or the measure of what is greedy, it changes, right? So my kids fighting over cookies, right? Oh, you ate 4 cookies. I only had 2, right? So, oh, okay. So eating more than 2 cookies, right, is greedy. So depending on who you're talking to and the context, the definition and the standard of what is greed changes. And so really you begin to sense that greed is more about covetousness, people desiring other people's stuff, right? So you got your stuff, but then you look at that person's stuff and you're like, why do they have more than me? And so it's covetousness if you're thinking about where that sense and where that feeling and that outrage comes from. In which case, right, the conversation changes. So if we stay on greed, just that concept and that thinking and what people are thinking when they use that word greed, well, the pretty much the only thing that you can know for certain is that the person who uses the word greed has less than the person they're accusing of being greedy, right? Because imagine if you were making more than someone you're calling greedy, right? Well, it'll come right back on you right away. It'll be very easy for you to see that this person is being a hypocrite and what are they talking about anyway? And so, in order to use the word greed, you have to talk about someone who has more than you. By the way, I did talk about greed a couple times in other episodes. I think over a year ago, I did talk about greed. I think it's free market greed or something like that. So you can check out that episode as well. And I think it's before I got the new microphone. But anyway, so it's about time I talk about greed again to refresh everyone's memory. And so the only real legitimate time that people feel comfortable using the word greed, accusing someone of greedy, is that they have to have more than you. Elementary school students feel very comfortable talking about anyone is greedy because everyone makes more than them. But otherwise, when they are talking more about their own level, it has to be someone who makes more than them or who has more than them. And so, really, that's all that word is telling you, who has more than whom. And so it is a pejorative. It's a term that is used only in the negative, right? So you're going to call someone greedy because you want everyone else to dislike that person because they're greedy, right? And that's the only function of this word if you really get down to it. And the only information that we get, the new information that we can get from talking about greedy people is who has more than whom, right? But if you think about it, and my definition of greed is wanting more than you have right now, which means that everyone is greedy. Everyone wants more than you have now. And this was a really easy sell at the university because everyone is greedy for knowledge, right? Well, how is the greed for knowledge any less bad or, you know, uh, less bad or good or bad, worse, better or worse than monetary greed, right? Because a lot of people make the argument, hey, you get a college education, you make more money, right? And so basically everything ties back to wanting more than what you have now. If your clothes wear out, well, then you want more clothes. And also you have to remember that, or you might want to note that our lifestyle or our standard of living expands with our income. The more money we make, the more we tend to spend more, get a better apartment, better house, better car, better clothes, et cetera, et cetera. And so our lifestyle expands to meet the level of our income. But if we go, and so that's just greed. And so if you think about it, it's not a big deal. We're all greedy. So to point out that someone else is more greedy than you, well, who cares, really? There's just nothing to learn or gain there at all, except that you don't like that person. You don't like that that person has more than you. But true greed can only be satisfied or achieved by satisfying someone else's greed, right? Because it's not just those corporate CEOs who are greedy. Everyone is greedy. So how are you going to satisfy your desire for more? Well, the only way you can do that is you by satisfying other people's desire for more. How do you do that? Well, if I'm selling a product, I have to sell it at a lower price, satisfying the greed of my customers who want to save more of their money, right? They want to keep more of their money. They want to spend less. They want to be able to buy more with less. They want to buy better products, better quality products, higher quantities. And this greed can only be satisfied through increased productivity. So a truly greedy business will focus on productivity to satisfy the greed of their customers. Also, you can think about the pencil, right? And the pencil I talked before as that single story that revolutionized the way I thought about race, right? And there's that one line by Milton Friedman when he talks about the pencil in Free to Choose, chapter 1, where he says that even people who would hate each other will cooperate with each other to make money. In other words, greed is more powerful than hate. Nothing else matters, right? I used to say to my students, like, what if I give you $5 each and, or okay, $10 each, inflation, right? So $10 each. And I said, go buy a beverage of that you want and come back, right? I'll give you a half hour. Let's just say I did that. When you go out to a store and you are going to purchase a beverage, what do? Go up to the manager and say, what's your political affiliation? What religion do you subscribe to? No, you ask them if they have that, you know, drink and how much does it cost? That's all you care about. Nothing else matters. The race, whether they can even speak English or not. Who cares, right? Do you have the product and how much does it cost, right? And if it's not satisfactory to you, then you're not going to buy that drink. If it was your money, you would probably care more. If because you're spending my $10, maybe you'll spend the whole $10. Who knows? But then I'm not asking for a refund. So the less you spend on the drink, the more you keep for yourself. Hey, I can buy lunch, right? So greed or self-interest, right? That's a synonym, right? for greed is looking out for yourself, right? To be selfish. And we've talked about this, right? Most people learn about being selfish. It's bad to be selfish, but that's not actually true, right? It's a kind of selfishness that a lot of people will want to shame people for. And that's when you pursue your self-interest unjustly, right? When you lie in order to satisfy your self-interest, that's when we're going into a problem. Otherwise, everyone is selfish. Everyone is acting in their own self-interest. But in that situation, right, the choices are being made with the chooser's interest as being the priority. And so, because we all know, all of us are consumers, even if you are a business owner and you are selling stuff, you put yourself in the position of your customers and you realize that just as you would not want to overspend for overpriced items, so you have to balance that knowledge with the price of the goods that you're selling. So everyone is greedy, and that is what makes it our protection, right? Because we are inherently greedy, we can sense when someone is trying to take advantage of us. So we look for alternatives, right? Way back in the day, before people understood, like before I understood that certain department stores just mark up their prices. Like once you realize that the quality of some of the items that you're buying at these high-end stores are comparable to some of the low-end stores, and I don't want to get into a discussion. Like I used to get into these discussions with youth group members, like, oh, I have to buy Louis Vuitton because of the quality, blah, 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 right? But most of them only use the things that they're overpriced handbags for less than a year, right? And that's pretty much how long a cheap knockoff would last, about a year. And so, you save a lot of money that way. But anyway, it's subjective what you want to buy, what you think is worth it, and all this other kind of stuff. And so greed, our personal greed, what our personal level of satisfaction is our protection, right? And so if you think something is way overpriced or not worth it, then you look for an alternative. And that is where competitors of the largest producer of the most popular product, right? That's where competitors have an opening. That's where competitors can see opportunity. And those of us who are discriminatory shoppers, we can find our bargains that way. So our own personal greed protects us from overspending, wasting our money. Now, people who get hung up on greed are really narrow-minded, uncreative, unimaginative people, right? Because they can't think of alternate choices. They can't think of a way around this overpriced system. They impose through force, right, their solutions, which is a non-solution. Their solution is just simply complaining and hating and then mouthing off the solution that someone else whispered in their ear, right? So overpriced healthcare, single payer healthcare, right? Like, do you even know what that is? No, but that's what everyone is saying is the solution. And based on what they've told me, it's as good as sliced bread. No, you're being subjective. It's not even a real legitimate solution. You're just simply going along with the propaganda to give power to people who are already corrupt. And so the evil, greedy people that people are imagining are actually those people who take and produce nothing, right? Now, remember, a store owner sells, but the person who buys gets something in return. But evil, greedy people are those who take and give you nothing in return. In other words, they are taking by force and giving you nothing in return, or something of very low quality. And that would be, of course, the government. The government and everyone affiliated with government entities who tax and spend. And it's never enough. They always want more. They want so much more that they even steal from us secretly through inflation. Right. And then all of their followers, the wannabes and the sycophants, right? They cater to everything that they say because they want to be part of the in crowd. They were told that this is what is virtuous. This is what it is to be a good person. And so they just repeat without ever really thinking. And I met a lot of these people. I taught a lot of these people, and those who are really honestly looking for solutions, they were able to come out. And a stubborn minority, right, who have nothing if they don't just parrot and repeat whatever propaganda that they heard, right? Without it, they're nothing. They're nobody. They're failures. And so they have to double down. They have to hold on to it even more. And so those are the only people that are keep going on. And those, of course, are the weak-minded people who are tricked and duped into committing acts of violence, like even assassinations and whatnot, right? So instead of demonizing this fictitious notion, subjective notion of greed, when in reality, the truly greedy, evil people that you want to go after are the people in politics and government, let everyone be greedy in the way they want, but you have to produce something that other people want. You have to be productive. You're not a destroyer of value and destroyer of life, right? You need to figure out, what can I produce that makes other people happy? And in order to do this, you have to ignore the complainers in the sense of the Karens, right? Like you can listen to people who complain as a guide to figuring out what to produce. And you can tell if you're successful if you are increasing productivity, if the prices of things come down. Nothing else matters. Environmentalism doesn't matter. Recycling doesn't matter. All of this morality, right, is doesn't really matter. We have to discover, right? Because usually it's backed by all this other subjectivity, which doesn't conserve anything, right? We have more pollution than we ever did, right? We have more risk of extinct animals going extinct now than we ever did. Why? Because government's in charge of protecting and conserving, and that's why everything is getting wasted. So instead of catering to the loud, squeaky wheels, right, you listen and try to figure out, okay, what is the actual problem? So therefore, what is the actual solution? This whole phenomena surrounding and revolving around greed is a failure of education, right? A failure of our educational system, not only to mislead people in terms of what the word greed actually means and how it plays out in society, but also the failure of education not to teach people how to be creative. And I did this all the time. You might think that you are not naturally creative, but that's only because you don't know how to exploit or find alternatives. A person who is able to find a solution to a stubborn problem, that person is seen as creative. And so I've discussed in other places how to overcome problems. That's the whole theme of this podcast, getting out of the box, right? The light out of the box, right? And so if our educational system was actually something of value, then everyone would learn how to be creative, creatively solve problems instead of complaining about the problems that they have already created, and they reject that they're living in the consequences of their earlier choices, right? And so let's get rid of that. Let's put that in the past, be creative, and have a society that is constantly growing, advancing, um, you know, moving forward, bringing people out of poverty, making people happier. That's it for today. Hopefully, it wasn't too rushed. But again, I got to get on the road for my kids' jazz performance. So I'll talk to you guys next time.